Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about student loans and whether or not they should be forgiven or partially written off. Now, there's a difference between how student loans are handled in different countries. In Australia, as an example, if someone with a student loan makes less than the minimum payback amount, the minimum threshold, then and does that for 10 years continuously, then most of the time, maybe not every time, but most of the time, the loan is just written off. The taxpayer takes it, and billions get spent on these write-offs. They tend to be the write-offs tend to be for the most worthless and useless degrees anyway. But then you should ask, well, why are these people being allowed to go to university and get a government-backed loan to study peace studies or gender studies or African American music studies, or those sorts of things. It's a bit different if somebody wants to study a worthwhile degree, but not those degrees, for goodness sakes. Now, the amount of I guess we need to have a little bit of history here. Sort of 40, 50 years ago, 2 or 3% of the kids that started high school went to university. It was a very small group. About a third of those would drop out, couldn't hack it because it was quite rigorous back then. There was none of this, you're a black lesbian, we'll give you a degree and you don't have to do any work or meet an independent standard of rigor or something. There was none of that at the time, unless you had a super rich daddy. But other than that, you had to pass, you had to work really hard to get through it. There were a smaller number of degrees then, and most of them were, directed at say, science and medicine, those sorts of things, law. Now, the cutoff mark for getting into university was very high, and you had to pass an exam. There was none of this, your parents don't speak English, so we'll give you a free pass. It wasn't anything like that at the time. That it was just starting to be talked about and was starting to come in, but rigor was it. So if you didn't get sort of in your final senior high school graduation exam, if you didn't get an average of about 75%, and that was sort of the minimum, you didn't have a snowball's chance to get into university. So the cutoff point was pretty high. Anyone getting 75% was doing pretty good. And it was even higher for other subjects. And there was a certain amount of places that were available each year, for example, 1,000 or whatever it was. And it was the top 1,000 that would get picked. So sometimes the cutoff point would be 87% or 89%, 91%, that sort of thing. And so if you had a lot of bright kids just happened to sort of rando turn up that year, the average could be 90% plus to get those places, or one of those places, university. But that all changed. The government started politically interfering with it. So what was a national organic process, the government started, all across the Western world, the government started to intrude. And so we want 60% of kids who start high school, we want 60% of them to end up going to university. And to do that, we've got to lower the standard and lower the standard and lower the standard and then lower it some more to make sure that people get in there. So really, if I sort of look at like my time in high school, out of say 180 kids in the form, there was maybe you'd say 30 or 40 that were pretty bright, and then maybe 10 that you'd say were starting to sort of be maybe approaching the exceptional, but and that was quite a good school from a well-to-do area. So there really wasn't that many. So say you'd get 1,200, 10. Even if you were generous and sort of widened the net, at the very best, at the most optimistic, you'd have 10% of the kids were bright. Not even that many. So they want to go to 60%. Now, if I look at the kids sort of starting around the middle, then when I'm thinking back to when I was at high school, there weren't many bright ones around the middle. Some of them were just because they were lazy or couldn't be bothered. Others because they were stupid, and that sort of thing. So it varied. But to send those kids to university is laughable. I mean, it's a joke. They're not going to. So in order, once you get them to university, and with lowered pass marks to get in, then you have to lower the standards at university. Otherwise, that they wouldn't last 5 minutes. They'd sit for exams, and they'd get 0%, 1%, those sorts of things. But which, by the way, there were kids. I remember kids at high school used to get that. I remember kids who regularly get 5% in the exam. Seemed inconceivable to me, but I think, well, how could somebody be that dumb? Gee. But those kids now, because they add in assessment and they make all sorts of allowances for, did their parents speak English as a first language, or all sorts of things are added in, then you can have them getting 51%, which is now enough to go to university, and in that 51%, there are built in a lot of allowances. So what you do is you've got this massive amount of kids who are dumb, who wouldn't go to university under other circumstances, are now eligible to go, and they're being told, well, look, if you want a decent paying job and want to get ahead in life, you really have to have a degree. And that was true when degrees were rare, but what the idiots have done is they've made degrees common. Everyone's got one, so they've been devalued. So a job that required a junior high school education, like a junior high school diploma, to get 30, 40 years ago, now requires a degree, if not master's, to get. But it's the same job, and it has the same, if not less, purchasing power than it had back then. So to get a job that you cannot possibly get ahead on, you now need a master's degree or a master's. So, I mean, that's all starting to add up. And now a basic college degree is now considered as nothing. It's nothing anymore because too many people have it. And those who have it were just waved through junior high school, waved through senior high school, and then waved through university. Now, on top of that, the amount of degrees that are just dumbass, just ridiculous degrees, African American music studies, black studies, peace studies, gender studies, gay lesbian studies. I mean, it's just insane. Interpretive dance studies, lesbian dance studies, all these things, and they're but the kids are they're being hit up for like 15,000 bucks a year for these bullshit degrees. And so they come out with all this debt. And now for the odd one or two that can get a job as executive diversity and inclusion officer to spread hatred wherever they go, those sort of people, they may do all right. But the amount of people, it wouldn't even be 0.5% of the kids that do those crappy degrees end up getting those sort of jobs. So the chances are you're going to be a barista at somewhere, and or maybe pushing a broom, or some in a cafe, maybe some very basic job, working cleaning rooms in a hotel, and so on. So the chances of paying the degree back, the loan back, is very slim. Now in Australia, as I mentioned earlier, they often write degrees off if someone hasn't been able to get a high enough salary to pay it back. And I think, off the top of my head, I think you got to make like a minimum of 50,000 a year or something like that. And if you don't make that, so it's in, it's worth it for kids just to put some casual jobs, live with the folks, make $30,000 a year, and then wait 10 years just treading water, and then on the 11th year they're free of their debt and they can go out. But by that stage, they'll be in their early 30s, and they're only just starting to sort of try and build and accumulate wealth. I mean, that's insane. So it's destroying an entire generation of kids that could have left school at 15 and gone and done something else, and managed to grow up and experience life and take on responsibilities at a much earlier age, which would make them very different people. I'm amazed at how many people I meet at the age of 30 that are still 12 years old, mentally and emotionally. It just blows me away. They've got no concept of responsibility, and they're still running around, this very childlike, girly sort of thing. That's all. They're still playing house and running around saying, "I find that offensive," and this you're running around like children. So looking at the in totality, the student loan thing, they've been unreasonably encouraged. I believe unreasonably encouraged to go to university. And some of the screaming lefties say, well, if a degree means you're part of the elite, why don't we make sure that everybody has a degree? Then we're all part of the elite. And that's like, a script out of South Park or something like that. It's just so childish and ridiculous and absurd. But it's very much how these sort of sociology leftists think. If a master's is what the elite, or a PhD is what makes you one of the elite, let's give a PhD to everybody. And then we're all... So there's this idea that you can create equality artificially by giving everyone a degree, and without them having earned it. Now, what gave the degree its value was it was a measure of someone's academic ability, their ability, their intelligence, their ability to study hard and work hard and research hard and so on. And that's why it was part of an elite, because they'd achieved an independent standard of excellence. But when you give a degree to everybody for no reason at all, and no rigor and no standard of excellence, then the degree loses all its value, which comes back to the thing where workers, and you said, just go onto any job board, you see even people that have a master's, the salary or the pay being offered for having a degree and a master's is still 10 to 15% less than the average wage. And if you've got a master's, you've taken on a pretty serious debt there. So the student has. So should the students, if you're a student, you say, hey, I was duped. I was told if I went to college and I got a degree that I'd get a really great job that paid lots and lots of money, and I'd be living in a fancy house, driving a flash car, and that sort of thing. But so they'd say, well, that hasn't happened. I've done everything you wanted me to, and look, all I'm doing is sweeping floors at the hardware store. So those people would have a reasonable gripe. So, well, why did you get me to do this when it clearly hasn't paid off? And I do understand that sentiment. The government should say, well, we tried to push these kids into university, even though they had an IQ of -5 million, we still encouraged them to go to university, and we threw out all standards of excellence and rigor in the process. And so we've created this artificial non-value of a college or university degree. So I think there is an argument for some kids to say, well, look, it's not my fault. The government lowered the standards. The government offered me a loan, and I went with it. Now there are other aspects. There's people I know that worked a number of casual jobs. They were living with their folks, but they worked a number of casual jobs, and they really paid off most of their loan working these jobs. And the jobs could be anything, could be delivering pizzas, but they worked hard at it, and they paid off most of their loans before they left college. When they graduated, they only had a few $1,000s of debt left. There are other kids that saw the source of money as just a gravy train. So they could get a certain amount of money, and then they could, say, use it to have a nice vacation somewhere. It's pretty much open-ended. It's a guaranteed loan, and they could. So instead of staying at somewhere modest, like a 2-star hotel or something, they'd go, well, let's go 5-star. Hey, why not? We can get the money, and so this all gets added in, and then when they at the end of their college time, they've got a pretty sizable debt, which is not only for the fees, the tuition fees and so on, but also for the vacationing and the partying and the good times they had. So there are kids that have made a concerted effort to work all the way along. They treated university with utmost serious, no partying, no snorting and no, dropping weed or anything like that. They focused on the study and they worked, as I say, at delivering pizzas and paid off most or all of the loan. So should those kids who were very prudent and sensible and hardworking, should they be penalised because other kids were less prudent? So if we're going to bail out kids that have got the debt, shouldn't we also then pay back? If we look at the time frame, the timeline they want to do it over, shouldn't we also pay back the kids that did pay their loan as compensation for their sensible and prudent handling of money and their sense of responsibility? It's not so easy as just writing off the loans. I think it goes further than that. But I look forward to seeing your views below. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.